Great games at your table. I'm Jonathan Albin, and this is Game Master's Soapbox. Today we're going to be talking about what it is like to be a good role player. I've been watching videos, of course, who doesn't? But in particular, I've been watching videos from other game masters and games aficionados talking about horrible things that players do and what are the worst player types and things like that. And I really feel that the biggest challenge is that we don't share enough with players or with individuals that aren't yet players what it takes to be a good or great player. Because if we provided them with more information, they might be able to be more excellent in our games than we would expect. And I expect excellence from my players only because I provide them with a quality story with enough meat to really sink their teeth into, and to provide them with a place where they can become more just through the game mechanics itself. So today we're going to be looking at a list of these and talking about how a player can truly be the best at role-playing possible.
Absorbing damage is the name of your game.
Okay, so the question is how to become the best player possible. And the first question, of course, is begged, and that is why you would want to play a role-playing game. And I just recently did a video about that subject, and I'll put a link for it right up here above us, right there. And then you'll be able to find why you would want to be in a role-playing game. But let's just talk about what it takes to be the best player at the table. And I know there's a lot of people out there that are probably screaming at their screens because, of course, you can't win at role-playing games. There's no checklist for who gets the most points for doing the best in a role-playing game. But if you take a look at these 7 items, I think you'll see how they can support the idea of you being a contributing member, a valid member, and a useful and enjoyable member of a games group if you follow these 7 points. I list them as steps, but that's really not accurate. It's not like you have to do one of these before you do the others. This is really a kind of a holistic approach that I'm hoping to share. So we're going to be looking at them step by step and discussing how each of one of them applies, and we may touch on some problems that occur in role-playing games and how players can be less than effective if they're not careful. But I think we're going to see that these are things that everybody could easily pick up and utilize. And it isn't just for how to be a better player. This is also how to be a better communicator, how to be a better friend, etc., etc. But in this case, we're targeting it to a role-play environment. So before we get into the actual full details, and there's a couple that to me are so obvious that they need to be stepped out away from the others. These are just simple things that we should use and should be to be good people. And I listed them in a particular order, and I don't know why, but let me engage in reverse and say I would expect that everyone is hopeful that when we have a communication with somebody, we're doing it because we feel a really deep relationship with them and a hope that we can communicate and share these ideas together, that the experience will be a positive one, and that we will provide them the benefit of the doubt in dealing with things that they also are trying to make the game the optimal it can be. The second thing to talk about is engaging. And to be engaging, I pushed off and pushed away, but the reality is that we need to be engaging. We need to be participants in the game session. We want to have our minds and our hands on the game itself, and not just sitting back and having it fed to us. There are forms of entertainment that are for that, but role-playing is really intended to be something that is a group effort, that each person brings to the table what they have to offer, and the other players work with them to really become a cohesive unit, coherent organized group to do whatever the objectives of the campaign are. And ultimately, we all need to be polite. And this politeness really, I think, is one of the things that's missing. I did an entire video on how we should be more kind to one another, and I'll put a link for that one here because that was one of my personally favorite videos I ever made, is the one on kindness. But when I'm speaking about being polite, I mean following normal decorum. In other words, when it's your turn to speak, speak your mind, state your opinion, state your concept or decision or whatever, and then wait your turn again thereafter, because the point is you have a group of people that are all wanting to communicate, and we want to provide the means for that. So politeness is the ability to hold your peace while it's not your turn, and also to be kind and considerate when it comes to making sure everybody has a good time at the table, because it's about being a part of a group. It's not being an individual and saving everybody. It's a matter of sharing the experience. Now, I put on my headphones today, which I don't normally wear, and I don't really know why I did it, but it's actually a good example of having good listening skills. I often will have my headphones on when I'm doing a recording to make sure that I hear for any interruptions that might be done by a separate piece of software or whatever. But when I speak of good listening skills here, I'm referring to three points. The first one is that you need to be engaging. And that in listening, you have to be an engaged person. And the visuals of a good listener versus a bad listener are pretty overt. The idea of being a bad listener means that you're tuning out, you're pulling out your cell phone, you're playing with your whatever device you have with you, you're not clearly paying attention to the game, and that's a bad listener skill. Being attentive, even when it's not your turn, is important, because at least in my estimation, the players at the table are going to be acting as the collective consciousness of the individual character. And there may be something that you as a character heard, the words actually passed through the communication, but that you as the player might have missed. And so it's important to let the other players at the table, in a way, at least act as your awareness or consciousness, and they might bring up something in a later point that was important, that you did indeed have the opportunity to hear, but whether you took a note on it or made a reference to it in your own way, it falls upon you to let the other players act in that role, because it's collectively a good thing for more information to be had rather than less. Additionally, good listening skills mean that you're going to be keeping track of the NPC names, having the conversations within the game as if they are conversations, but at the same time also keeping track of with whom you spoke and what the topic of this discussion was and where this all occurred. It also means that in the case of a environment that is theater of the mind, that you are getting a good visual on a location. So a good listener also asks good questions about what they've just heard to make sure that they got it accurately and that they haven't lost track of what's going on in the scene. So developing good listening skills is something that every game player, even every game master, really needs to do, because the ability to hear, understand, and react to the things that are said in game is absolutely critical to your success in the game, and also for your persona to develop their understanding of what's going on in the scenes. Akin to that and associated with that is to please players will want to learn to contribute to the dialogue. And this dialogue, I'm using it in both senses of the word. In the dialogue of the game, even if you're in the meta environment, make sure you put in your 2 cents, give your opinion, express the way you feel, so that your intentions and your will is a part of the equation for everyone. It doesn't mean you necessarily talk over each other, but it does mean that when you have an opinion, you cite it and explain it when it's opportune to do so. If it's a in-character dialogue, of course, make sure that you are actually in the scene before you attempt to contribute to the dialogue, because it's really kind of off-putting when you reach outside of the main storyline to put in your 2 cents. So realize that the contribution portion of this needs to be also adhering to the other concepts we talked about in terms of being polite and waiting your turn. But make sure that you aren't just a wallflower. A great game player is going to be a part of the decision-making process, whether his ideas are grabbed in it and acted upon, or if they are determined to be not as useful in that moment. You still need to be a contributor to the case, because it definitely helps all the other players at the table really know what the will of the group is. Alrighty, so now when I say do your homework, this is in particular for people who utilize Dungeons and Dragons or other role-play mechanisms where the advancement of the character is done fundamentally in between sessions and in advance of the play session. But that's only a piece of the do your homework aspect here. If you are, for example, involved with a campaign and you've said that in particular you're going to be doing in particular research on a specific portion of a map or whatever, get after it. Do that as part of your game. As you may know, I do Nikos Nightly news updates, not nightly, but basically once per week. And when that happens, you can tell who has done their homework and who has not, merely by those who can recall what was brought up in the last news report, because that means they're keeping tabs on what's going on in the rest of the world. And while it could be argued that certain times characters may not have access to that information, nonetheless I provide it because I want the players as a group collectively to have the shared experience of knowing what's going on and interacting with that as well. So doing your homework also means determine what was going to be in the story from last week and carry it forward into this week as well, so that the rest of the team can make good decisions. And a person who is wanting to be a great game player is going to do their homework so that they are carrying their own weight in the group's dynamics as well. Another thing that players need to do, and this one, it doesn't seem necessary to say this, but the reality is that engaging imagination and thoughtfulness in the game, particularly leading up to your turn in the game, is really important. If you are in a theater of the mind environment and the entire description of the location has been lost on you, then it's up to you to provide that feedback to the storyteller, game master, and the other players to be more clear with what's going on in the scene, and to engage your imagination in visualizing, comprehending, in other words, what is going on. As I've said before, I've had conversations with people about the concept of aphasia, but I've not run into anybody with that particular condition that I know of. Just about everybody that of whom I am aware seems to be able to create and hold images of what we are talking about. But this is a bigger issue than merely that. When you are given agency in the story and you have the opportunity to act and do and be, engaging your imagination and your thoughtfulness literally is play the part that you've arranged to play, and engage as that person and be inside of the imagination. We'll talk about this more in a moment, but the idea here is that the wholeness of the play experience really does depend on everyone keeping track of what's going on visually and also conceptually, and being thoughtful rather than thoughtless in your actions really contributes to that effort for everybody at the table. So when we are talking about playing a role-play game, and we're talking about the actions that occur and the conditions that are placed upon the personas in the game, a great game player will try to feel the session's impact. They will try to experience what this would mean for them as individuals. For example, this last week, one of my players, a considerably long tail person who's been with my campaigns off and on for better part of a dozen years, literally in character expressed that he needed to withdraw from the action and be by himself for a while, not because of anything that had happened in the real fleshly world, but something that happened in game that had shaken his personal foundation. And so it was a perfect decision to make for his persona at that moment, because he had run into a situation he'd never run into before, and that was he had made a particularly successful attack against a monster, but the monster's reaction wasn't what he anticipated, and it shocked him, and it for once scared him about the livelihood of his persona and whether or not they were actually going to survive the encounter. And this ability to experience the emotional side is really, when they talk about the basis of role play, this is the aspect that game masters literally dream of, so to speak, having a player who is impacted and affected by the game in such a way that they, as a player, are able to translate what that would feel like for the persona. It's just amazing. And it's something to endeavor to attempt, even if you've never done it before. Think about this fact that you are at the tabletop level, you are looking into the face of the monster or whatever, and you're having to deal with what that may portend, and therefore you need to emote properly. And so feeling the session's impact, whether it be for whimsy or for seriousness, in any case, the idea is that you're able to become, for that moment, in the scene and part of the action. And this is also important, and I have had players who have had rather difficulty in dealing with this idea, but the idea of playing at the tabletop level really refers to how to be in the scene. Many game players who have, especially those who have played video games over time, have gotten into the perception of looking over their persona's shoulder from a third-party position, and therefore often speak of what their character would do in those terms. My character would do this, my character would say that, this is what my character might think. The idea here of playing at the tabletop is to actually descend down to and see out through the eyes of the persona, so that your experiences and your reactions can be visceral and realistic in terms of what the character might do in that scene. Doesn't mean it has to be there all the time, and certainly we do drift from different levels within the narrative of a role-play game, speaking of movement in a pragmatic way, or talking about picking up a collection of items by the group. In those cases, we do often go to the third party, but to be able to slide back in and play at the tabletop level is a hallmark of a great game player, because you are now in the scene with everyone else that is there, and you're aware of where you are in the scene and how the others would be able to perceive of your actions as being a part of that story. This really comes down to it, and that is that you need to, for at least portions of the game session, be the persona. I just recently had a conversation with one of the friends of the show who doesn't feel the same way about this and prefers to play in the third person. And every game master is going to have a different take on that, I suppose. But my reasons for holding to the idea of you becoming the persona is that the world that I built, the place known as Nikos, is deep and rich, and there's a lot to experience. but it's far more exciting to hear the players interacting with it in the first person as they are physically seeing it within the role play session, and therefore are reacting to the actual stimulus instead of in a standoffish way identifying or recognizing that it has happened. In this case, you're actually experiencing it as it happens. Now, I've said all that to say this, as Grandpa would say. The idea is that we're here to have fun. We're here to enjoy the experience. We're here to see what we can do within the realm of the setting and the situation. But it's more than that. As I said, I've been watching videos over the last few days of game masters who are either pointing out what's wrong with players or what's divisive about the way they want to experience the game and such. And the reality is that the players are coming to the table to have fun. It is important to understand how and what they're looking for that will make it enjoyable to them. But at the same time, it's important for us to make sure that we provide to each other the engine by which this can be an enjoyable experience, and we can attain more in less time by being polite, being kind, and all of that, but also to play the game as the persona. And if there's something that becomes problematic, bring attention to it, draw it out, but do so in a way that is polite and caring to the others so that the game sessions will be fun. Now, I want to thank you for being here tonight. Thank you, as always. We're here Monday through Friday, generally twice a day, and more information about that is available in the comments down below. And for more information about our property, check out NikosRPG.com, where you can get the free to play fast play version rules, as well as order and download the PDF of all of the pre-release versions of the books. I'll also put the link down below if you want to purchase the entire suite. They're available at Shopify, at our Shopify store. So thanks again for being here, and remember what my granddad always says: I know you did a lot of work this week, but right now, you go play.